Ready to get started? Hello, welcome to Detnet. We've learned something at this meeting. You really don't want to be the session right after a really nice snack break because no one shows up. So we have much less people in the room than we normally do, but we really appreciate you showing up. We'll get more done, that's right. So I'm Lou Berger, this is Janos Farkas. We have our secretary, Ethan Grossman here, and welcome to Detnet. What's that? Okay, can you hear me? Apparently I have to eat the mic. Welcome to Detnet. Our agenda is online, and as is our working group information, please take a look. This is we've been here for a few days, so everyone here should be familiar with the Note Well. If you're not, please be aware that everything you say here becomes part of our record and that we have rules governing contributions. And if you're unfamiliar with them, please take a look at the URL at the bottom of the page, IETF.org, about notewell.html. For a meeting, we are streaming video. We're recording also. Everything is available via YouTube or audio download. We're also using our joint minute taking via Etherpad. Please join in and help make sure that your comments are accurately captured and just help us out to have accurate minutes. Really appreciate that. The agenda is online and the blue sheets are circulating. Please do sign the blue sheets. That helps both identify who's in the room as well as how big a room we get. We have two sessions. The first session, you're here now, so thank you. Agenda is unmodified. So this has been what's basically been posted for a while. For the second session, this is the second session. Great. We've had a little bit of a change. The one number 10 in bold is an addition, a late request that was added. I think we've been doing a better job of using the list as well as incremental meetings or periodic meetings among working group authors. All of those are advertised on the list and open to all. We've been doing a pretty good job, but it's really important when there's a discussion to use the list as much as possible. That ensures that, well, for new drafts, it ensures that the working group is aware of what you're doing. For working group drafts, it helps ensure that we have good communication and good agreement on the drafts. And as we know, we're here to have a consensus on drafts to submit for publication as RFCs. We follow an IPR disclosure process here. I think most people are familiar with it at this point, but basically we do formal IPR calls at both adoption and last call, and response by all contributors and authors is required in order to move to the next stage, whether that be adoption or submission to the IESG for publication. Since the last meeting, we've had 3 RFCs published, so that's really great. We sort of were a little slow getting going, but now we are pushing out documents, which is a great reflection of the work that those in the room and those on the list have helped us achieve, so thank you for all your work. We have a number of documents that have gone through last call. We're going to talk about status on those, so we don't have to talk about details on them. They're on the, as I said, they're on the agenda. We have some document, we only have one document that's not on the agenda, that's the bounded latency. Do we have anyone in the room who is a bounded latency author? Ethan. Do you know what the plan is for, Ishan, sorry, not Ethan, Ishan. What's the plan for the next update of the document? Please come to the mic and let us know. state your name and tell us what the plan is for the next update.
Yes, Ehsan Mohammadpour from EPFL. The idea is that for the next draft, for the next IETF, we're planning to finalize some sections that are related to the calculation of a delay bound, which is mostly some mechanism that is that can be used in Detnet. And we hope that we can finish it in IETF 108, which is in Madrid, I guess, to have a final version of the whole draft to be to go for the next level.
Great. Thank you very much.
For the current state, we had some terminology update and some consistency check for the Detnet based on the other drafts that is existing. And that's it.
Great. Thank you for the update. Appreciate it. So where are we in terms of our deliverables and milestones? We had a set of core deliverables that were called out when the working group was formed. We are really in good shape compared to where we were, let's say, a year ago. We have our overall architecture published. We have the core data plane documents that have passed last call. And the Detnet over TSN was the first technology, subnetwork technology that we had called out, and those documents are close. You'll hear from the authors how close we are. Hopefully, we'll see something IETF 107 that we can get to last call. The flow information document also is proceeding along, and we do hope to get to last call. There was some discussion that you'll hear about between the flow information model authors and the Yang models authors, and there might be some additional updates based on that. The Yang models is on the agenda, and that's in process. The other part of it that was pretty important that was called out in the charter and my initial milestones was the security document. And we're looking to do a last call by IETF 107. That too is on the agenda. We'll get an update. One of the points that came up with our AD is whether to do an early review or just a standard review from the security area. We're actually going to request an early review as soon as the authors tell us that they think it's good to go. So we have a question of what's next. And this question is based on who would like to contribute to what, and then what the IESG says is our AD say is acceptable work activities for the working group. And we've thrown out a couple of items, and the intent here is to spend a couple of minutes just getting the reaction of the room, but we're aiming towards a charter discussion at the next meeting. And some of that charter discussion may also bring in some of the results of the raw BOF, where that discussion was really, I took it as Detnet over wireless. I'll speak for myself, and you can agree. Our hope is that becomes a complementary activity, whether the ISG chooses to do it as its own working group or within this working group. Either way, as long as the work's done, I think we should all see it as a benefit. So that may be also something that brings in that we'll have to watch what happens with the ISG as the result of that BOF.
So, Lou Anderson, I'm obviously not up to speed really. So the security document, what state is that in now?
Very close.
Huh? Really close to working group last call.
Right, and it's on the agenda, so you'll have an opportunity.
Okay, I will have a look at it.
Yes, thank you. I'm doing in the second group. I'm doing a presentation on it. There'll be a
either a microphone or away from the mic. Okay.
David Black, talking security documents. So yeah, a lot of good work on security documents, a lot of good text in there. However, one of the reasons for requesting an early security area review is the IETF version of no battle plan survives initial contact with the enemy. We could see some interesting things come out of that review, and the sooner we learn that, the better.
Great, thank you. So one of the items here was a setup for someone who we thought would be in the room, but instead we'll just refer to his mail list. So Greg Mirsky sent a comment to the list about the OEM for MPLS and document, and we had here he is, and he didn't come to the mic, so I'll still talk about it. He's going to come to the mic. So we'll give him a minute.
Greg Mirsky, ZT. Their authors believe that OEM for Detnet over MPLS network provides their needed technical solution, and the document is stable. And we would like to working group consider adoption of this work.
Okay. Thank you. We had talked about this at the last meeting, and there was some moderate support. The issue with why we didn't do an adoption until now was there was very few people who had read it. The people who had read it seemed to like it, but very few. At this point, our feeling is we're going to do an adoption call and see if there's sufficient support. And if there isn't, we'll go from there.
Right. So if I may, if I already
lean in really close, because I'm sorry, there's just a lot of noise behind. No, get close, because there's noise behind that we can't hear.
Okay. Because actually I hear it very loudly, so that's why I'm stepping back. Because so you're probably aware that there is another document for OEM over Detnet IP. I've sent some proposal because in our opinion of authors, there is a big challenge, technical problem of mapping OEM session between endpoints onto their Detnet IP flow that to be monitored. So I sent some proposal. I appreciate your comments, thoughts. Let's discuss it on the mailing list. And then once we reach some solution that we agree with, then we'll get to their consideration for adoption of second document.
Great. Really appreciate you fostering the discussion in that area.
I have a question about the charter. Actually, it have been a while. We are contribute in the work of SRv6 based Detnet, and the others, including me, are very confused whether this part of work belongs to the current charter or it will be included in the re-charter part.
I think it's a good discussion to have. One of the things that we'll have to work out is that work happen here or in spring? Generally, if you're talking about new data plane mechanisms, you go to the group that owns that, unless there's an agreement to do it elsewhere. Right now, they own the that data plane. So we would need agreement from that working group to do it here. Without that agreement, we're going to assume that it's going to you would have to do the work in spring. So I believe you have a new data plane mechanism, and that probably will have to be done there. But it's a good topic to raise, and we'll have to work that out with our AD and the AD of that group. It's a different AD. So we'll have to work that out of where the work happens.
Actually, I am totally okay with doing that job in spring. It doesn't matter. But I think because the MPS-based Detnet and IP-based Detnet belongs Detnet, so I think maybe naturally SRv6-based Detnet should belong to Detnet as well. So I'm a little confused, and considering that it is very busy in spring recently, and we have a time slot in spring in previous session, but there is no time left for presentation. And I think even we have some time slot, there will not be a lot of discussions on that I think in the current spring stage.
Right. I'm sure you have to go run over there because it's happening right now, right?
Yeah. So as the author, I prefer to put this part of work in Detnet first, I think.
Sure.
Yeah. But if the chairs or AD have other suggestions, we can discuss.
Yeah, since it's their technology, they're really going to have first say. So it's really going to be the working group chair's call and then the AD's call. I think from our perspective, like we were talking about related to wireless, we'd like to see the work done, and where it happens is secondary. But they sort of have to say they don't want it before we can say we want to take it.
Okay, so I will talk with the chairs of spring first.
Sure, and that will be something that we'll also talk over with our AD, Deborah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? Please feel free to make also follow-on comments to the list. Another great way to ensure that your topic is included in the discussion for IETF 107 is to have a draft that you can, an individual draft that you bring forward and submit towards the Detnet working group. That will help us make sure that we don't miss your topic. This is our last slide on the administrative piece. We want to give the working group a heads up that we're talking about doing another joint session with IEEE 802.1 TSN. We had a really good session in Bangkok after the IETF at the start of the Bangkok IEEE meeting. So that was exactly a year ago. And we're going back to Bangkok next year, and the IEEE is meeting the week before us. So the thinking is we'd like to propose and investigate doing another joint workshop or meeting on the Saturday before the IETF. So the IEEE ends on the Friday. We would immediately, the next day, we would have this meeting. That's the straw man proposal. This is not yet confirmed, but we wanted to first let the working group know that this is being discussed. And second, just get a feeling from the room of how many people participated in the last one, so that'll be question one, and then question two is would be interested, or we're not looking for commitments, but be interested in participating in this next one. So how many people participated in the last one? Okay, so it's a small number, but a reasonable set. And interested in if we have one next year, think they might attend. So a bit more. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Greg Merskizity. Question to chairs. You think it will be the same format as more lecture or discussion?
It depends a lot. You wanna?
Yeah, I mean, I personally would love to see more discussions.
Yes, I agree.
That was last time. That was the first of this occasion, and maybe we should figure out ways to foster more discussion.
Okay, thank you. I agree.
One of the other things depends on how many people show up. And when we started, we envisioned a small group, and it turned out to be a really big group.
Yes.
And that makes it a little harder to get the discussion, but it's good input that we should figure out how to have to foster more discussion.
I think it's okay that we have the first more introduction to technologies. So maybe in a second we can do something for both parties, more like call for papers, and people will submit some proposals for the shorter presentations. So basically break it, not a big presentation that does an overview of the technology, but people talk about specific use cases and problems.
Thank you for that. Good ideas. Okay, we're going to move now on to the first topic, which is the framework.
Hi, Hi, my name is Balázs Varga. I will share you where we are with the data plane drafts. The first presentation is about the framework. You might remember that we have decided to have a building block approach regarding the data plane drafts. So that is the first of the 8 drafts. I will speak about each of them. So let's start with the framework. The current version of the framework document is version 3. This content is quite stable, and it is providing an overall framework for a deterministic network data plane. So it is covers the concept and the considerations that are generally common for any of the deterministic networking data plane specifications. Inside the document, we have sections dealing with the Detnet data plane. There are some encapsulation-related consideration. Detnet specific metadata are also covered. We have framework topics on the IP data plane and the MPLS data plane, and also some functions, building blocks, and scenarios are covered, like service protection, aggregation, and systems, and subnetwork. In the document, we have also a section dealing with the controller plane considerations. We have the Sheffer review for this document, and there was also a workgroup last call. It was finished at the beginning of October, and we have received pretty good comments how to improve the documents. So all the clarification, editorial changes are resolved in the version 3, which is the current version. So based on that, the authors think that it is ready for submission for the EISG. So that is the current status on the framework document. Any questions, comments?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so the next summary is about 4 data plane documents. 2 of them are the IP and the MPLS data plane, and 2 of them are related to subnet scenarios where Detnet nodes are interconnected over a subnetwork. For each of these documents, we have a version 3, and we will go through all of them. In the Detnet IP data plane document, it is specifying the Detnet data plane over an IP packet switch network. In the current specification of the IP data plane and the format of the Detnet flow, we don't have a sequence number. So that means that from Detnet perspective, we have only a forwarding sublayer related specification. Also, the Detnet IP data plane procedures are described, and we have also a section dealing with the management and control information summary. Based on the feedbacks and discussions on the list, there were one technical change in the document, and it is related to the ECN. That ECN is omitted from the flow identification possibilities. And there were some recent discussion on the list regarding the use of the 5 tuples, and this is what I have highlighted at the bottom of the slide. That in order to maximize the reuse of 5 tuple based mechanisms and solutions, it is envisioned that end system and Detnet aware application should not mix Detnet and non-Detnet traffic within the same single 5 tuple. The next document is the MPLS data plane document. It is dealing with the Detnet data plane when we have an MPLS-based network. In case of MPLS, we have description for both sublayers, for the service sublayer and also the forwarding sublayer, and also the data plane procedures are defined in the document. So the flow identifications, we are using labels, and for the sequence number, a .NET control word is used. And similarly to the previous data plane document, we have a management and control plane related considerations in the document. During the change of the document, there were only editorial changes and fine-tuning. So the technical content of the document has not changed when we have created the version 3. And now let's speak about the two data plane documents which are dealing with subnet scenarios. The first is the IP over MPLS document. In that case, two .NET IP nodes are interconnected over an MPLS subnet. So that is the scenario that the document covers. It is describing the data plane scenario, the encapsulation, and it is also showing for IP over MPLS procedures how the flow identification and how the traffic treatment is done. And again, as for all the data plane documents, we have a management and control information summary. The same applies for this document as well. When we have created version 3, there were only editorial changes and fine-tunings in the document, so it is also pretty quite stable. And last, let's speak about the scenario where two MPLS .NET nodes are interconnected over an IP subnet. Yeah, here is a failure on the figure. So .NET MPLS over .NET IP is what we are covering, and this is also the procedures that we are describing. And here again, for preparation for the control plane discussions, the considerations regarding management and control is also included in the document. That document had also just editorial and fine-tunings when we have created the version 3, so it is quite in a good shape and in a stable format. So currently with the version 3 of these documents, the shepherd view were done. And we have also a version of last call. It finished 11th of November. So this version 3 is the latest version, included all the comments that we have for the document during the work. And the authors think that these documents are in a pretty good shape, so they are ready for submission to the EISG. Any comments, questions?
There was a comment that came in this week on the IP document. Do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, this is something I have highlighted on the slides. This is not yet included in this format. I will make a version for that document in order to make that happen. And there were also comments regarding the references, normative and informative references. I think this is also something should be cleaned up. That was also recently on the list.
Okay, so for the last slide, you said that it's ready. It sounds like there's one more version before it's ready.
But I think we know exactly what to do word by word with that document. So this is why I think that, yes, when the version 4 are created, then it is ready for the submission.
Okay. Maybe we can get it done by the end of the session while things are going on. We'll make the changes and push them and get it published. How's that?
Yeah, as usual.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, any comments, questions?
Just a note, it turns out everyone up here is a contributor to this work. So Ethan is actually shepherding this and sort of owns the documents from a process standpoint. So it's just want to make sure everyone knows that. And Ethan, do you want to add anything?
Not really, except that these are the first Shepherd write-ups I've done, and I still have them marked as, waiting for review. So I appreciate a little bit of input just to make sure that everything's consonant.
Okay. All right.
Okay, and now let's speak about 3 documents where we have also new content from the compared to the previous version, and they are the TSN related documents. So we have 2 data plane documents dealing with Detnet over TSN subnet scenario when we are interconnecting IP or MPLS Detnet nodes over a TSN network. And the last one is dealing with the scenario when TSN domains are interconnected via a Detnet network. For these documents, we have version 1. Version 0 was created after the split of the IP and MPLS data plane solution documents. And these are practically the new documents. For the documents, we have created a new document structure that is valid for all the 3. And we have made at several points cleanup, and we have also filled up with some text where we had not yet text. So there are new stuff in these drafts. First, let's speak about when 2 IP.NET nodes are interconnected over a TSN subnetwork. Because we are speaking about the .NET IP data plane, we should take care only about the .NET forwarding sublayer. So this is what is covered in the document. Service protection is not possible end-to-end. However, in the TSN subnetwork, this is something that you can provide when you are interconnecting the IP .NET nodes. On the right side, you can see the structure of the document. Just below here, you can see the scenario. So this is the TSN subnetwork, and the 2 IP.NET nodes are interconnected. The concept to describe this scenario is that we are focusing on IP.NET nodes which are TSN aware. So this is something you can see here on the right side. So this is the TSN aware talker or listener. So this is the role that IP.NET node plays from the TSN subnetwork perspective. We have also collected the management and control information related aspects because you have to map the .NET flows to TSN streams when you are crossing that subnetwork. The document is containing requirements for a TSN aware IP.NET node. Such nodes are member both the .NET domain and the TSN subnetwork. Within the TSN subnetwork, that IP.NET node has a TSN aware talker or listener role. And the .NET flow IDs and the flow related parameters requirements are mapped to related TSN stream IDs and stream related parameters. So this is a requirement that we have to solve when we are speaking about management and control plane. There is also some interesting scenario when you are triggering the setup or a modification of a TSN stream in the TSN subnetwork. And this is where management and control plane interactions might be required between the .NET and the TSN subnetwork. The document does not have any requirements on TSN unaware IP.NET nodes because you have no new requirements on them. However, this is something that we have marked in the management and control consideration that in such a cases, it might be even more problematic or more complex to start such a triggering between the 2 domains because the IP.NET node is not at all aware about that subnetwork. The second subnet-related scenario is covered in the next document. This is the MPLS over TSN scenario, where a TSN subnetwork interconnecting 2 MPLS.NET nodes. We are speaking about a MPLS data plane, so both the service and the forwarding sublayer are described in the document. you can do service protection both in the TSN domain and in the MPLS .NET domain. However, how service protection interworking can be made, this is something that is left for further study in the current version of the document. And here, the concept is very similar to the previous one. So you have your MPLS.NET node, and it should be a TSN-aware talker or listener from the TSN subnetwork perspective. So again, you have to map the MPLS.NET flows to TSN streams in the network. So that means that that this MPLS.NET nodes has a TSN-aware talker or listener role. The flow IDs and the related parameters have to be mapped to the streams and the related parameters. And if you have to change anything, you need some triggering and interaction between the management and control plane of the .NET domain and the TSN domain. The same statement applies for the TSN-aware MPLS.NET nodes, as I have said in the previous case, and just highlighted again that the service protection interworking scenarios are left for further study. And last but not least, we have a data plane document dealing with the scenario how to interconnect TSN domains over a .NET MPLS network. In this case, the concept is that the TSN stream, what is there inside the TSN domain, it is treated as a .NET app flow. And the .NET domain behaves like a big fat TSN relay node from the TSN domain perspective. And the service proxy function, this is what is making that mapping of TSN streams to .NET flows. And this is what can be treated like a port in that big fat TSN relay node. So what we are defining in the document is this whole concept is described, and also the TSN over MPLS data plane procedure I defined in detail. There are some TSN-related functions, .NET Server-related, service proxy-related functions. .NET Service and forwarding sublayer are also described in detail, and the service protection interworking is also left for further study in that case. But might be interesting to highlight here that we have slightly modified or created this scenario-specific version, how this proxy is working with the TSN side of the network. If you look to, for example, to the architecture document, there is a high-level figure. Here in this document, we have a much more precise depiction of those scenarios. Again, management and control plane-related consideration. You have to map the .NET flows and the TSN streams. And that mapping is something that is happening at the service proxy function of the MPLS.NET Edge node. And that .NET Edge node is a member of both domain. And it is acting from the TSN domain perspective as a TSN relay node. Here again, we need some interaction at the management and control plane. When a TSN stream is set up, modified, or turned, you have to know it in the MPLS domain and react accordingly. And just again, highlighting service protection interworking is left for further study. So this is where we are with these documents. But we intend to have as a next step to collect the feedback from the group that whether there are any missing items or something that you would like to describe in more detail or somewhat differently. And then also to add the conformance language to these data plane documents. So that is the plan. Questions, comments?
Ethan Grossman. I note in the security consideration sections of these various drafts that they're quite small. And in looking at the security considerations for the other data plane drafts, the data planes, IP and MPLS, we've been looking in the security group for things that are time sensitive specific and data plane specific. Have you given much thought to that? Are you confident that there isn't anything specific to the TSN, the security considerations for these, or do you think that that's a subject that needs further study?
This is something that needs further study. So we have identified that this is just something to be done in the future versions. So this is something to be done.
Okay, so presumably we'll fill it. There is a section waiting for that in the security draft. So presumably we're going to fill it in there.
Yeah.
One question that came up in just discussing the structure was, well, say we publish the security considerations draft, then we get another data plane, like some wireless thing or something. Then obviously this draft will be closed, so everything will have to go into the data plane specific document. So I was just curious whether it's a good idea to keep using this model or whether we should figure we're going to migrate to a model where that information that's specific to that data plane goes in the data plane draft.
I think at the point it's for further discussion. So I'm happy to have any working solution in order to fill up those sections and being in line with the other documents. So
can I just have a clarification to your question? So because actually the security document was gated by the base data plane actually and the architecture. And my understanding is you want to avoid any kind of situation like saying this is it for now in the security document, and from a borderline, if there is any new data plane draft that has to deal with its own security considerations. Did I get it right that that's what you are after?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see how else to do it unless we pull all the stuff out and insist that it goes there now. But since those drafts have already been last called, and we couldn't find anything anyway, we're sort of at the moment, we're in a consistent state because we couldn't find anything. But if we go forwards and we do find something, then it might be interesting.
My view is we have a base set of documents where it's sort of the foundational documents. And as we move forward, we can either refer back to those foundational documents and say we've addressed the security considerations there, or if we identify something new, we do that in the new document. We do have to make sure that those foundational documents do adequately cover the security considerations, and we will do that when you do an early review, as we talked about, and make sure we have a nice, consistent security directorate review of all the documents, and they'll keep us honest.
Okay.
Just to bring another example, I mean, SRv6, there are contributions as a new Detnet data plane. I think that SRv6 document should have its own security consideration complete. That's my personal view.
Okay, so I guess for the IP and MPLS, that one maybe, do we cut it off there and say, or do we include TSN and then cut it off after that?
What is there right now?
Basically in the TSN one?
No, the security document. Do you cover TSN or do you not cover TSN?
There's a placeholder that says to be written. So it's like something that there's nothing there.
I would say cover the core technology and move all the TSN security considerations to the TSN document.
Okay, I'm good with that.
That way it covers our core technology only.
Okay, done.
And if you'd like, you can make a statement that will be covered in the technology specific documents and, for example, the TSN, and that would be an informational reference.
Okay, great.
So timeline, what are you thinking in terms of having a version that you believe is stable enough for last call?
For the TSN documents, you mean?
Yeah.
I think we need at least 2 meeting cycle.
I'm sorry. Did you say 1 or 2? I just
2 meeting cycles. That would
Okay.
be my expectations.
All right, great. So targeting, where are we, Madrid?
July, that's Madrid, yeah.
Yeah, Madrid. Okay. How many have read this version of the document? That's really very few. Clearly, these documents have not had adequate review to really know what the working group thinks about it.
3 working cycles?
No. From a process standpoint, I would hope for 1, but 2 sounds. We'll go adjust our milestones accordingly. I think aiming for 2 is better than.
I think the next what we can discuss is when we have also the conformance language. So there I also expect some further considerations. So this is why I think that at least 2 cycles are needed.
Keep in mind we are contribution driven. So if you feel like you're willing, please review the document. If you see things that you'd like to see changed, please send the suggested changes to the list. You do enough of those, you get added as a contributor or an author. So there's opportunity here.
Shosongo, I just suggest that maybe we can send this part of work also to the IEEE, because I think TSN people may very interested in how to do the mapping between the Detnet and the TSN. Because in the previous joint meeting, a lot of people they are curious about how to use their 3 deterministic technologies and how to use them with TSN. So I think maybe there will be a lot of potential reviewers there in IEEE. That is just a suggestion.
Okay, so the suggestion is once we have a stable document to send it to the IEEE, or is the suggestion to send it to the IEEE as is and say, please help us?
Yes.
No, which one?
Which one?
Wait for stable, or
I think this version is good enough for send it to the IEEE.
So I heard the author, and by the way, I'm not an author on these. I heard the author say that he'd like to get the serious review once the conformance language was there. So maybe wait until that.
I think
I would like to also collect the feedbacks regarding the current version.
In general, I prefer the practice of sending a stable document to another organization. So
it's reasonable.
Maybe it's better to do it when it becomes more stable. I mean, without conformance language, it's not ready to do.
Actually, I just want to perhaps more reviewers will give more feedback to the drafts. But I think when the draft is stable, it's also okay.
Good suggestion. Thank you very much. Any other comments?
Okay, so the next topic is update on flow information model. I will talk about a bit of a reminders what this is about, and then explain the updates of the draft and what are the next steps. So the focus of this document is the pointer. Oops. So the flow information, as the title says, plus the information model for the service. And this is from the document that both the figure and the text, what is an information model and what is data model. So the subject of this document is the flow information model and the service information model. And data models are the subject of the Yang document you will hear about after my presentation. So what happened since the last IETF? We had version 4 for the last IETF and 2 updates since then, version 6 and version 5. In version 5, we had a number of editorial updates, clean up in the language and many clarifications in the text and in the attribute formats, for example, making it clear in that well-known names are attributes. And the formerly empty placeholder security section has been filled in. Security considerations have been added, and these were mainly contributed by Don Feddick, who is now a new co-author of the document. After that, in version 6, practically speaking, there was one technical change. A new attribute has been added for IP flow identification, the IPsec SPI. This is a security parameter index, which is a kind of an identification tag if IPsec is used. So that has been added to the parameter list for flow identification. And just a reminder, this is the structure of the attributes. This is what is captured in the draft. So as I said, the key parts are the flow and the service information model parts, but it's very important input for these, how we describe an application flow. And this is many-to-one mappings from left to right. So multiple app flows can be mapped to a Detnet flow, and multiple Detnet flows can be mapped to a Detnet service. So where we are, what is next? This first question we keep repeating to the group, and this is there any missing attributes? And this I would like to ask people to review the draft and give comments. On the last two items, actually we had a working session, as you saw on the email list last night, and it's very important that to ensure that this document and the Yang document are absolutely in line. Actually, we find some gaps. Kesong will talk about it in the next slide in detail. And this leads to the other question. We told before that it's the flow information model draft is ready as is for working group last call. Now, actually, I would say after filling in these gaps between the two in some form, we think that the authors think we are close and ready for working group last call. So that's it on my side. David?
David Black, I'm not Greg Mursky, but I'm going to ask an OEM question anyway. And this is actually a bigger scope question of which is the cart, which is the horse, and how do we cope with it, which is MPLS OEM looks like a fairly clean add-on via the ACH. IP OEM looks like anything but. How far along do we have to get with IP OEM to figure out that we don't need anything else? It's probably going to turn out to be mostly in the IP data plane draft if we wind up needing to do something clever about flow identification to get the OEM flows to behave. How do we skin this one?
That's a good question, and actually I haven't really seen detailed discussion on this on the list. So yeah, that seems to be a bit of an open question. No ideas have been brought so far, and that's a good question in the sense of how do we get done? Because as you, my understanding of Greg's points and proposal was to not to bind together the MPLS and the IP OEM, but let the MPLS OEM progress, and then progress later as we can with the IP OEM. The one question I heard from your point is, should we hold the flow information model back until we get done with the IP OEM?
I'm not sure what I'm suggesting. What I'm observing is that, as you said, the MPLS OEM is clean. It's pretty clear that yes, we know how to how to identify the OEM flows as OEM. My suspicion is that Greg's proposal affects IP flow identification, and hence he's going to hit the IP data plane draft, and is going to hit this one. And I guess the question to you as chairs is how much do you want somewhere? The choice is something like, do we push pause and unscramble enough of OEM that we know what it's going to look like? Or do we carry on to get the IP data plane done and then come back and figure out how to do OEM, possibly revving the IP data plane if necessary?
So I think you're really making a comment on the, was it 2 talks ago? Not this one?
Quite possibly, but it's
so it's
as
on
good an
the-
excuse to ask anything as both as it's going to hit both drafts.
Right. So this is an interesting. Sorry, I have to eat the mic. This is an interesting question as chairs because we're also contributors to it. So as with the chair hat on, and with what we think is the consensus of the working group, and I'm stating it so anyone can come to the mic and tell us we're wrong, including the AD. As chairs, we've said we're going to define the core, get those out, and keep pushing along and do OAM when it shows up. We've also made the technical call that OAM is going to have to follow the path of the flows, so has to meet our flow definitions. And we certainly have had some conversations of ways that could be done, but we don't have a document. Greg got the status right. We don't have a document that gives us an answer yet, so we don't have confirmation of that.
Okay,
But from a process standpoint, we're saying we're going to move forward and understand that OAM is going to trail. And yes, we understand that there's risk here, and it's important for the working group to understand there's risk here. And
okay. I think you've answered the question, which is that the working group consensus is believed to be that the IP data plane draft needs to move forward without further delay. As OAM gets unscrambled, if it impacts the IP data plane, we get to come back and revise that and deal with that when we get there.
right. And just for your information, I even had the conversation this week with Greg about it. Some of our thinking on this is to do, David, I'm answering your question. If you're distracted, you're not going to hear it. Stuart, let me finish. So the thinking is on OAM is that we'll end up having to do some wider flow rules that cover both the OAM traffic and the 6-tuple for the data flow. And that's probably as good as we're going to get. Now, we're going to have to run that through the whole process, see if anyone has better ideas, but that's what we think we're going to, sort of the direction we're going to end up.
So maybe I slept at the wrong moment or something. This is a pretty jet laggy meeting, but there isn't even a way for regular IP of getting an OAM message to be congruent with it. I mean, this is way more fundamental than any problem we're trying to solve here.
And that's why I gave the answer that I just did, which is the only thing we have is we can have multiple flows be congruent by adjusting our flow rules.
Yeah, I mean, I just think this is so hard that we know how to do it for MPLS, but for IP, I don't think there exists a solution anywhere in the IETF.
I agree. And so the question for the working group is, do we not push the data plane, the IP data plane document forward and wait until we have an OAM solution, or do we push it forward and try to align our OAM solution with the IP document? That's the question for the working group, and I think you've heard what the chairs think the consensus is. It's opportunity of the working group now to say disagree.
Okay, what I think I heard is the latter, which is push the IP data plane document forward, which makes sense. And revising some of your remarks slightly, I would say aligning OAM with IP data plane, modifying the IP data plane if and as necessary.
So as a contributor, I think we had a good job and effort, actually made effort to make the IP data plane in line with IP principles. And I think it's good to go. And if we develop OAM, it's a hard problem, but that should be in line with IP principles anyways.
So Pascal Thubert, you asked if all the possible way of signaling a flow were listed in this document, and there's another one which is actually not listed. I was just wondering if you're interested in adding it to it. So if you have a REPL domain, and so you're using REPL to do the routing inside that domain, Then there is work at ROL, which actually enables to do what we call route projection, which is really installing a route from the root directly into the network. And this route is what we call a track in 6-dish. It's a complex route. I mean, something very akin to what we do here. And it is signaled in the packet using a hop-by-hop header, which contains some information which is akin to a VRF information. So there are local and global VRFs. So the local ones really tie the destination of the packet, which is the exit of this track, with a number which is locally significant there. And that basically tells you which routing table you need to look at for this packet. Mm-hmm. And you can have huge numbers of those things in a Ripple network. So that's how we actually signal not really the flow, but the path that the flow is supposed to go, which also means that you could place the OAM and the data on the same path, and they will follow it to the destination, which is the case I wanted to give to Stuart, that we actually have one case where we know how to merge the flow and the IOM into the same thing. So is it something you want to capture here, or do you see it as an exception that's not interesting?
So one way I understood what you said is that technology is a kind of instantiation of explicit routing encoded in the data plane, data packets, like Spring. And with the benefits of making OAM co-routed.
So the like Spring can be it's more like what you put in the packet is more like topology identification, like a VRF ID, not the source route path, right?
Okay.
So it's a different overlay. You just if you knew about multi-topology routing, that's more like that.
Yes. So I think
so we actually, the mechanisms that we built the IP data plane on are closer to policy routing. So if you look at policy routing, you can do very similar things, and you don't have to have topology, and you don't have the topology IDs. You have an MRT or the SIDs that you have in Spring. You just have policies. So I think what you're saying is we should pursue a path that maps different flows to the same basically policy.
Right. The policy tells you which flows go in which rib, and now you stamp the rib in the packet, and the packet follows this rib. The question is, this is how we signal the equivalent of a flow in our packets. Is this something worth capturing? You asked this missing attributes. Well, that's a flow identification attribute. Well, not really a flow; it's topology, but
I see it's something below. It's not a flow. It's routing, kind of. Details to do, but that can be a good technology choice at I would say a lower layer, not seen at the level of flow information. But if we can maybe double check offline if what you see as a flow information, flow ID out of that.
If you place only one flow plus the OAM into that particular topology, because that's redesigned for it, right? There are many of them. It's designed one per flow. So at some point, it's family, but it's not the same thing. So
I think it would be great if you could collaborate with Greg on his document and try to capture these ideas and help us move that work forward. Because I think it's actually it would fit in quite well.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Next is Yang. So, Kasong, if you could...
Oops. Wait. Okay. You see the clicker?
This one?
You're upside down. Forward.
Okay, it works. This is Xue Song, and I will present our work about Detnet configuration YANG model. And thank you for the contribution of other authors. Here is the history of our work. This draft is accepted as a working group document after IETF 102. And in the first version, we separate the .NET topology Yang in another document. And in version 2, we receive some feedback from the working group, and we update the following attributes. We end the sequence number generation considering the OAM, and we end the DNet service decapsulation and also DNet transport tunnel decapsulation. In version 3, we do a lot of work about the configuration structure update in IETF 104 and 105. In version 4, which is the current version, we modify the scope of the DNet Yang model mainly to go align with the information model work. And here is the previous version. Basically, we define the DNet configuration module, which is defined for DNet flow path building, flow status reporting, and DNet functions configurations. We define 4 modules inside the this Yang model, which include the attributes of application flow, service sublayer, and forwarding sublayer, and subnetwork. This is based on the DNet data plane protocol stack defined in the architecture document. And in this version, we try to do some modification to go along with the structure as the previous slides show, because in the information model, there is a DNet service attributes. So we end the DNet service module to include the service quality attributes such as the latency, the loss, the misordering. And we also end the endpoints attributes to indicate the start point and the end point of the DNet service. And maybe the encapsulation type attributes is also needed. It can be MPLS or IP. And we keep the DNet configuration module stable, just as the previous slides. But after some discussions with the author of information model, there is a call meeting, and we also meet each other yesterday, and we find that these two models are still not well aligned yet. So the mapping between the information model and the Yang model are still to be defined. And we plan to work together after this meeting. Perhaps we will have a call meeting every week to make this work done. And the picture shows that in the left hand is the information model. We see that there are 3 boxes, and in the right hand, that is the oh, sorry, I write this wrong. This is the structure of the Yang model, and we have 4 elements. So maybe how to map the information model attributes to the Yang model attributes and make it very easy to understand is our next step work. And that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify the next step. So we are planning to have virtual meetings, working sessions, like we are having for the data plane announced on the list to move forward. I don't think it will be weekly. We will need to figure out when, but that's part of the plan.
David Black, wearing transport area tech advisor hat. Small request. We've talked about it in the past. As you work towards the next revisions draft, which looks like a lot of work, there is still in this version the DSCP and the DSV bitmask pair that needs to be changed to a DSCP list. It's a small item that should be dealt with sooner or later. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're going to end up with a major revision. One of the comments that I saw is it's very flat and not taking into account sort of some of the layout you'd want to have an extensible foundation for future augmentation. And so I think you're going to see.
I'm expecting major changes.
Yeah.
I'm just let's check this box now so we don't have to go back and discover, oops, we forgot to check it 3 versions from now. That's all.
David, if I understand this right, I remember that you have very similar comments in the previous meetings. So we haven't updated the draft based on your comments. I remember I've done this.
It's okay. As I said, let's just since there's clearly major revision coming, let's just simply check the box while we're there. No problems.
Okay, thank you. If you find that there is still something wrong, please let us know by the mailing list. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we're actually running a bit ahead, which is pretty rare, which is actually really good because our tech advisor, David Black, can't be here for the second session and really wanted to be here for the security document. If Ethan, if you're willing, can you go now? Yeah. Great. So we're going to move that slot up. Find it. That one, which is one off.
Oh, okay, good. All right. I'm Ethan Grossman, and this is an update for the security considerations draft. So the intent of the draft is to be a reference and a toolkit for network designers who have not necessarily dealt with time-sensitive networks before. So this is relatively new in the IETF, so we figured we'd have a clearinghouse for that kind of information. So this document doesn't address the general considerations for security for IP and MPLS networks. We leave that to the existing documentation. We're very focused on only the time-specific aspects of it. And the relation of this drafts to the security consideration sections in the other Detnet drafts is that basically each of those drafts is to have its own security section addressing issues specific to that particular draft topic, but then having a reference to this draft to cover all of the more general technology independent and other considerations. That way we don't have to duplicate these many pages in each draft. So at the moment, the technology independent section, in other words, regardless of whether you're on an IP-based network or MPLS, that section is fairly mature at this point. This draft's been running for nigh on 2 years, and we've had a fair number of eyes on that part, and there's a fair amount of organization. There's a few little bits to fill in, but that part's pretty mature. The thing that we thought we were really going to do as the next big thing was the IP and MPLS specific sections. We thought, well, there's got to be stuff that's specific to both time-sensitive networks and the IP implementation versus the MPLS implementation. So we've had as many people as I could manage to wrangle into discussing this look at this, and so far the result is that we haven't really found any unique threats that are both related to time-sensitive and not covered in the general case, but are specific to that data plane. So we have, later I have, hoping we can have a little bit of conversation, but maybe it'll just get deferred to the list. But my sense is that if you've ever read the Gladwell book about Blink, there's this thing where people who have been doing something for a long time just have a certain sense of intuition, but it's not just intuition from nowhere, it's intuition from many years of working on it. So I guess what I was asking is that if you could think about that statement. I mean, at the moment our stance is there's nothing technology specific about these. So we've got sections in the security draft that say IP, nothing specific, it's all just the general stuff. MPLS, nothing specific, just the general stuff. Does that ring true, or does that leave a bad feeling in your stomach? Because I haven't gotten anybody to come with anything specific, but I'd settle for a general feeling about it. So that's just one way to approach what to me at the moment is kind of an intractable problem, is trying to figure that out. So that's one thing. So the TSN specific section we discussed a little earlier is not started yet, but we're going to defer that to the TSN specific draft. So that's off of my plate. Good. The other thing that I'm in a quandary about going forwards is this. In the use cases draft, if you've read it, you know that at the end of it, I sort of collected all of the related security-related statements from every other draft that I could find at the time. It hasn't picked up the new ones lately, but basically, particularly from the use cases draft, because they were like all these little kind of funny statements, and there's not really a requirements document. So I thought, well, how is anybody going to review the security draft without understanding what the criteria and the requirements are? So I said, well, collect all these things. That's as close as we have. And that way people can look at those and say, well, this is kind of what's expected. Do we think that we're covering the territory? So my question is, well, what do I do with that stuff? I mean, do I leave it in the draft? If I do, then there's a process of updating it and make sure I've got all the stuff to date that's been added since, you know, that was last worked on, which was many months ago. Or do we just chuck it and figure it doesn't really belong in the security draft? Anyway, interesting questions to ponder. We may have a second for discussion if we do, and I'd like your input on that. I will. Okay, so I look forward to your input any minute now. Right now. Discussion. Okay, so there were 3 questions that I had intended to ask. One of them, the third one, we've already actually managed to resolve about the Security Directorate review. Is it going to be before or after working group last call? And we decided that we would go for it at the beginning of last call. We would also submit for an early review. In other words, it would be before it was passed to the IESG, we would also have the Security Directorate have a look at it first in parallel with our working group last call. So I'm happy to have that result. The other couple things are about the data plane technology specific things. Does anybody have anything to say about that? And the security related statements from the use cases. Any thoughts about that?
So David Black is one of the people who drew a blank on data plane technology specific threats. I thought I would come to the mic and explain why my gut feel is that it's okay, or I'm not really upset about it. And let's just see if I can get somebody up to the microphone to debate me, and we'll learn something. Reason is that the security considerations draft is very much written from a threat model perspective. It takes a general functional model of time-sensitive networking and outlines all the various threats that could disrupt that. At that level, it's got pretty complete threat coverage. Now, if I plug a data plane in underneath that time-specific networking, I wind up refining that general functional model to a specific manifestation of data plane. The threats haven't changed, but how they impact the data plane probably has. But with the security draft having been written primarily in terms of threats and not in terms of specific manifestations in the data plane, the fact that we can't find any new threats against the data plane is not that big a surprise.
Interesting point. Good point. Does that mean that we should be talking about those specific impacts on the specific data planes? Or does it mean we're sticking with threat models and call it good?
I think you cast a die. I think the die was cast a while ago to write the overall security draft as an overall deterministic networking security draft, and that leads to its current threat model structure. So I'm not criticizing that. I'm trying to just sort of have a look at, is there a gap there? And the answer is, well, no. Did implementing deterministic networking on a specific data plane add new threats to deterministic networking? Perhaps not.
No, but I understood what you said, I thought, but my question was, we specifically did not address the impacts on a specific data plane. Is this a place where we should be thinking about that and not be talking so much about the threats, but about the... So is that a subject
from a truth and beauty perspective? I would say no. That when you're looking at a threat to a specific data plane mechanism, that's a security consideration for that data plane draft.
So another way of David, I like the way you phrased it. It actually triggered some additional thoughts that I hadn't had. So what's really different. By the way, this is Lou as contributor, not as chair. Okay. What's really different between the different data planes is how we do flow identification. That's about it. And so maybe we should focus on that and highlight, even in your general section about technology-specific threats, to articulate that the difference between them is how we identify flows. And so the additional threat there, or vulnerability, whatever the right word is that it may be easier or harder for one flow to impersonate another flow, or to potentially deny services based on the number of fields that are used. But that's really about it. between the technology specifics. The rest of it is all about service, and that's going to be 100% common.
And when we get OAM done, we'll have another difference.
Right.
Right. Okay, so the next steps we're looking at are to basically at this point finish it up and get through working group last call and security review.
Great, thank you. So we still are running a little bit ahead, but I think if we try to squeeze in another, we might run out of time in the session. So what we're going to do now is break until the second session. The second session is back in this room in half an hour. So instead of a 20-minute break, we're going to have a half-hour break. So see you all here at 5:40. Thank you.
I remain really, really worried that none of us understand the threat models properly. Because when you deploy it in a network, I don't think there are so few people who have any experience of large time-sensitive networks. Yeah. And I really think that it's an industry issue, that there will be all kinds of interesting threats and attacks that we haven't even thought of yet. People haven't really built this sort of network. They really want ultra-reliable, ultra-stable delays and all those sorts of things. They just run TDM. Seriously, I mean, that's or a piece of real wire.
Well, that's history. I mean, that's what people have been doing. That's what we're trying to move away from.
Yes. The other thing we might want to watch out for is that a lot of people, when they think they buy a wire, or as an Ethernet service, for example, from A to B from the carrier, aren't buying what they think they're buying. They're buying a multiplex. Sorry?
A slice.
Yes. Well, not even a slice. I mean, they're often buying a multiplex service. So.
If anyone missed signing the blue sheet, either raise your hand or come on up here.
I'm not sure that we can do anything other than do our best.
And almost like OAM, it's like to a certain degree, you just have to get the thing out there and then find out what happens. I mean, that's the other thing is once it gets out in the wild and isn't limited to our small group.
But I think maybe we need to be honest about it when we write the security documents. That this is. For a lot of this is really new territory, and the type and scope of threats are not well understood by the industry.
So we can phrase it somehow.
No, you can probably find a more politically